This is the High School Football Preview Show with Mike Wenmacher, Tim Schweitzer, Steve Bridge, and Derek Harris on 97.7 and 970 WMAY, Springfield's news and talk.
Welcome into Week 5 of the High School Football Preview Show. I am Mike Wenmacher, joined as always by the esteemed panel. Tim Schweitzer, you hear him on the SHG Cyclones broadcast. We also have Steve Bridge from the Rochester Rockets broadcast, and the man who's pretty much everywhere on the weekends and pretty much during the week if there's a high school sporting event going on from Channel 1450, Derek Paris. And gentlemen, Week 4 was fun, wasn't it?
Unbelievable.
So let's start. We'll go first to you, Tim, with SHG, a game they had circled since last year against QND. They were down 12-0 early, but came back at a 42-26 win. What stood out most to you in that victory for the Cyclones?
Well, Mike, after falling behind 12-zip, the Cyclones defense stepped up, made some good plays, including a goal line stand. And then they turned that goal line stand into a 99-yard, 15-play drive that got them back on the board, got them the lead, and they never really looked back. That was a turning point in the game against a really good Quincy Notre Dame team. And then SHG's Cam Brinkman, junior quarterback, a scramble drill on the last play of the first half to throw a Hail Mary touchdown pass into the end zone. And they end up winning by 2 scores over, again, a really good Quincy Notre Dame team. So I think the Cyclones are improving at the right time here at midseason, and they'll take on Lanphier this week, hoping to get some injured players back and not to get anybody else hurt.
You mentioned Cam Brinkman. It sure seems, and Derek, maybe you can talk about this too, be both you and Tim. It sure seems like he's starting to get really comfortable in that offense, and you're seeing that growth from last year to this year. Tim, I'll start with you.
Well, there's no doubt about it. And he's making very good decisions when he has the ball, whether to throw or run. His runs are, well, he's a strong kid, and his arm strength is up. So he's got the ability to make it with his legs, make it with his arm, and so far, so good for Sacred Heart Griffin. After that opening night loss to CBC, they have gotten better each week.
Derek, what have you seen from Brinkman and his kind of maturity as he's grown into the role this season?
Yeah, I think the decisions have been great. And also I think leading into that, a big reason why is because he's got the time. He has confidence in his guys up front. And that was kind of one of the big question marks going into that game was how will SHG's line hold up against a QND front that was big and strong and powerful. And I think they answered that question. For Cam to have the time to be able to make those decisions, to see if he wants to run, to see if he's going to have time to throw, that's huge. And so for a younger quarterback who's still learning the system and figuring things out, if he's comfortable back there and he's able to make his reads and go through his progressions and say, okay, that's not there, time for me to run. I think we've really seen him come along and make those right decisions. And that's a lot due to the confidence he has in the guys up front protecting him. And they've been mixing and matching lately, but for them to start getting healthy and have a little bit more depth at that position and also have the confidence of going against the Muscuda lines and now the QND lines, it's like, okay, you can really see them start to come into their own. And if Cam Brinkman gains confidence, man, watch out, because look what he's done already. And so he's really coming into his own. And I think last week was a true testament to that, to where you saw him be able to throw the ball. And we know that, the last 3 or 4 weeks, he's really been able to run the ball as well. So just a dangerous combination as Cam Brinkman continues to grow.
The offense is, brings the highlights, but they all say defense wins championships. Tim, what have you seen from that unit? You mentioned the big goal line stand, but how have you seen that unit kind of continue this season thus far for SHG coming into its own?
When they make a stop, there are 4 or 5 of them involved in the stop. And that's really key to the SHG defense this year. Get somebody to slow somebody on the other side down, and then everybody else come and finish them off. They've been very good at that. Their pursuit has been good. And Sacred Heart Griffin, again, seems to be getting better each week, which they did last year as well. It's good to see this year that they're overcoming the injuries that have made it difficult to know who's playing week to week. But overcoming the injuries, getting better each week, that's a good recipe headed toward the end of the regular season.
So let's move on from the SHG win over QND to the instant classic at Rocket Booster Stadium this past Friday night, as the Glenwood Titans win in overtime 43-42. Steve, as you were broadcasting that game, Rochester is up by a couple of scores. What was the feeling like on the broadcast? What was the feeling like as a Rochester fan, if you were in the stands? And when did that thing start to turn a little bit for Rochester?
I think the feeling always was as that game went on, Mike, Rochester had 2 14-point leads on Glenwood. And you knew that 14 probably wasn't quite enough. I mean, it could have been, because there were still opportunities late in that game for Rochester to have ended it before it went to overtime. But you always probably felt like, I know I did on the broadcast, that Glenwood was just still, too potentially strong, too many good seniors, a great senior quarterback and weapons all over the field, offensively and defensively, that 2 touchdowns would not be too much for them to overcome. And so I think it was always a bit of unease going on, especially in the stands. And I think certainly even on the Rocket sidelines for going, 2's not enough right now. We've got to get to that critical 3rd touchdown lead on the Titans, speaking as, a Rochester fan at that point in time, in order to feel like they were comfortable. And just the broadcast, Glenwood was just always in it enough, Mike, that you just knew that the 2 touchdowns was not going to be, the real margin of victory in that one, unless the Rockets did a little bit more in the 3rd and 4th quarter. And ultimately they were unable to. The Glenwood offense just sprung to life at critical points of times the entire game when they absolutely had to have it. They did. They were 5 for 5 on 4th down conversions. 2 of those 5 were touchdowns on 4th downs. And then, the Glenwood defense buckled down at the right time in the second half and just really made it difficult. And Rochester put him in 2nd and long, 3rd and long situations all night long. And, all of those things spilled together, poured into that big soup, turned out to be, an amazing game that finished in overtime with David Hay and the Glenwood Titans winning it on a 2-point conversion call.
Tough loss, obviously, for the Rockets, but what do you think, Steve, is something they can take away from this game and build upon? Obviously, when you're playing that close, there's still a lot of positives to come out. Obviously, not the result you want, but what are some of the positives you saw from that team in that game?
Right. I was talking to head coach Derek Leonard this morning for our preview of the U-High game coming up on Friday. And I said to him, hey, you scored 42 points on a top 5 team in 6A. You take them to overtime, you lose by a point, and all of a sudden you feel like you didn't score 42 points and you weren't up on a 6A team like that twice for 2 touchdowns, because all the other things that you didn't accomplish kind of pile on top of you. So that's the job of the coaching staff and the players to try to pull out all of those moral victories. And Rochester's probably not in the business of many moral victories over the past number of years. But you still got to look for it. They played really well at times. They were able to get on top of a really good physical 6A school, twice their size, be there in moments to be able to put them away, but then they didn't. So you just go back and find out, when we were up by 2 scores, what didn't we accomplish? What did they throw at us in order to slow us down that we're going to need to amend and change as this season goes along? So we continue, if you're Rochester, we continue to take advantage of those opportunities when we get them. Nobody really, the game ebbed and flowed so much, Mike. I don't think there was any one side of the ball or aspect of the ball that anybody, Glenwood or Rochester, truly dominated. So both coaches, Leonard and Hay, have just a lot of work cut out for them still through the rest of this season to make sure those 2 teams are really as good as they want to be once we get to week 10 and 11 and all throughout the playoffs.
Steve, it's funny you say that, and Derek, I'll get to you here in a moment and your takeaway from that game, but it's funny you mentioned that about the coach's dream. I made the same comment this morning to Coach Hay of, the tape for this one has to be a coach's dream. You get the win on the Glenwood side, but so many things on tape that you got to improve upon to meet your ultimate goal. And I think that's what you're saying with Coach Leonard too. It's like, it's one of those things of, there's no moral victories, but there's plenty on tape that we can get better on. And that was one of the things talking to Coach Hay earlier today. Derek, what did you see in that game between Glenwood and Rochester that stood out to you?
Yeah, I totally agree with everything Steve said. And just to add, kind of to that, I think if you look at the past Rochester teams of, the state championship caliber teams that they've had, most of the time during the regular season, they don't have games like this. And for still a younger team that Derek Leonard would say that they have, to experience a game like this, to experience a game like Mount Zion all in the first month of the season, yeah, they don't want to lose that game, but they walk away from that game knowing, okay, here's the things that we have to fix. Here's the things we did right. Here's the things that we did wrong. And so for the younger guys, I was actually over there at Rochester this morning and talked to Coach Lauber about it. They really spent a lot of time in film this week and came away, not necessarily happy they lost, but pleased with some of the results and some of the things that they were able to do. So I think a younger team learned a lot from that. And then on the Glenwood side, just from my perspective, I was on the Glenwood side during that game, and there was never a sense of panic. Even in the fourth quarter when you're down 2 touchdowns and Rochester has the ball, it was just, hey, huddle up. We're going to figure this out. And, the groups got together, and I don't know if you've ever seen Colton Knadler during the game, but he's about as calm as they get. He goes over to the side, he waits for his turn, and he steps on the field, puts his helmet on, just kind of like a warrior, to where, I mean, if you're following that guy into battle, you have complete confidence in him. And I think that came to fruition, to where you saw him do what needed to be done, and the defense stepped up. Dylan Huff got an interception. Imagine that, to where it was just so many of those things where you just expected the Glenwood guys, those seniors, to step up, and they did at the right times, and they made the plays down the stretch to win that game.
Yeah, Coach Hay said it, in the post game that you guys had at Channel 1450. Find a way. That was just that was the seniors, the leaders of that team were saying, find a way. And Coach was telling them all game, we're going to win this ball game. We're going to win this ball game. And you mentioned Colton Knadler, not his best game, but you sometimes forget how athletic he is. His feet were a real weapon in this ball game. Talk a little bit about that, Derek.
Yeah, absolutely. They kind of had to be, because he was under pressure, and we kind of knew from Rochester's front coming in, Xander Bridge and Connor Broughton, they were coming to get him, and they made him uncomfortable. It really was the case for the first 3.5 quarters or so, to where he wasn't ever comfortable back there. He was always looking for that extra option, and Rochester didn't really give up that big play to Blake Lanen that Glenwood usually gets, to where Colton had to figure out different ways to win this game, and I think just his composure and his senior leadership and the way he's able to kind of pick apart the defense, he was able to find a way, and he really stepped up and showed why he's an all-state caliber quarterback and just an exceptional leader for this team.
One final thought before we look ahead to week 5 as far as Glenwood goes. The thing when I was talking to Coach Hay earlier today was just the fact that the defense did such a good job containing the run game of Rochester. Right. Rochester came in, they had the leading rusher with Caden Stout, and it's kind of pick your poison. Even Coach Hay mentioned it. You got to pick your poison one way or the other when you're playing a team like Rochester. And he was very impressed with how the Glenwood front, how the Glenwood defense was able to contain that, and said they're going to need more of that this week when they take on Decatur MacArthur. And we'll get into that matchup here in a moment, but we'll go first to Tim. The Cyclones, after their big win, they get the Lanphier Lions. I imagine the biggest thing you mentioned earlier for this game for SHG is not pick up bad habits and get some guys healthy.
Mike, you're absolutely right. You can't take the week off just because Lanphier is a prohibitive underdog in this game. From the SHG perspective, they want to go in, they want to get off to a good start, get a 40-point lead, and get out of there with nobody else hurt. If they can accomplish all that, it'll be a good week for them in this week 5 game at Memorial Stadium. The first of 3 in a row in the City Series, with Southeast next week and Springfield High in 2 weeks for the Cyclones. Lanphier has a couple of nice players. Kamari Richmond, their junior quarterback, can motor. Trey Brown Sanchez, their fullback, has ability. But they're just they're very thin roster, and Sacred Heart Griffins expected to win handily, and that's what we expect to see in their game at Memorial Stadium this week.
Steve, Rochester tries to rebound. They take on normal U-High. What are you looking for in that ball game?
Well, it's a deceiving U-High team, right? They're 2-2, but they lost a tight one by 5 points to Bloomington, a couple classes bigger than them. They had 4 turnovers in that game. They lost a 1-point overtime game, sounds familiar, to Decatur MacArthur, but they never made an extra point in that game. They didn't kick one in and they didn't run one in, but they kicked a field goal and they still lost by a point in that one. So, the Pioneers are almost, with a couple of better things falling their way, either 3-1 or 4-0 and undefeated this deep into into a regular season here in the Central State 8. So the record just kind of hides maybe some of the strengths that they have. They have the number 3 passer in the CS8 and Owen Kirby. They have the leading receiver in Cade Cunningham. Cunningham was a key part of what the U-High Pioneers did a year ago when they made the IHSA semifinals in 4A, lost by a touchdown to the Mount Zion Braves. Right there, the effort to get to a state championship. They're young. They're kind of like Rochester at this stage. They took a lot of seniors off of that team a year ago, have put a lot of juniors and then new seniors into spots here and there. So the Pioneers are a tricky team right now for the Rockets to be dealing with on the road, because you could just look at it and say, oh, they've already lost 2 games this year, but where they've got weapons all over the place. They're really well coached, and they're still probably a little salty about the Rockets beating them last year after then they bounced back and beat Glenwood a year ago with all those seniors and that excellent team that they had a year ago led by then quarterback Alex Wheeland.
And for the Glenwood Titans, they get a very tough Decatur MacArthur team, a typical Coach Spates team. You got to bring your lunch pail. Something that Coach Hay actually pointed out, they lost their quarterback week 1. They've had a backup quarterback, but they've found ways to win. And Coach Hay said the busted play sometimes is the biggest play for Decatur MacArthur. So you always have to be alert. In the backfield, if there's something going on, there's a fumble, and you all of a sudden relax, be like, oh, I don't have to keep playing. They'll jump on that ball, and they'll take it for big gains. So it's going to be play discipline and match the physicality for Glenwood in their matchup with Decatur MacArthur. Derek, anything to add with that ball game between the Titans and the Generals?
I think that was the biggest thing, is probably just stay disciplined and make sure you take care of what you need to take care of. Obviously, they want to be back home and get a win at home, but I think, yeah, they definitely have MacArthur's full attention coming in at 4-0, knowing, last year Glenwood had a slip up at U-High. They don't want to have a slip up this year, especially after winning at Rochester the way they did. They want to win the conference. That's kind of their first goal of the season. So I look for Glenwood to be very focused and disciplined in this one.
Gentlemen, appreciate your time as always. I love doing this show. Tim, where can people find the SHG Lanphier game this week?
Sports Radio 1450 AM, 92.3 FM, sportsradio1450.com, and the Sports Radio 1450 app.
Steve, where can people find the Rochester Rockets broadcast?
97.7 FM, streaming at WMAY.com and on the WMAY app, Mike.
And for the Glenwood broadcast, it's 970 AM on WMAY, also WMAY.com, and through the app as well. And Derek, where are you going to be this week?
I'll be up at U-High for that one, but our game of the week will be the 4-0 versus 4-0 MacArthur at Chatham. But also pay attention to the big Sagamo one. Williamsville at Olympia is a big one in the Sagamo Conference as well.
Gentlemen, appreciate the time. Have great broadcast this week, and looking forward to reconvene next week for another edition of the High School Football Preview Show.
Catch the High School Football Preview Show live every Friday night at 6 on 97.7 and 970 WMAY. Listen to the podcast and watch the replay online at WMAY.com.